Hi, this is Orit Frenkel, and I'm just delighted to be here with Congresswoman Suzan DelBene. She is Vice Chair of the House Ways and Means Committee and co-chair of the Digital Trade Caucus. And we're here today to discuss what is a worker-centric digital trade policy, one that will make technology accessible and inclusive, and that will allow workers and other people to reap the benefits of the technology while protecting them from its harm. So I'm CEO of the American Leadership Initiative, and we've been doing a lot of work on this topic and look forward to hearing from you. So can I ask you to describe what you see as elements of a worker-centric digital trade policy?
Absolutely. And this is incredibly important. I think that a worker-centric digital trade agenda really needs to reflect our values and include protections for users of digital technologies, including strong provisions on consumer data privacy. I think that's a foundational issue that we have to get right. But as we look at policies going forward, we need to make sure that we are keeping things updated based on the way the world works today. And digital is a part of everything we do. It's a part of every sector of our economy. And so making sure that we look at it from a worker-centric perspective is very important as we continue to develop digital trade standards and an agenda around the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you know, and we've all seen during the pandemic, there have just been increasing abuses of privacy, and technologies like facial recognition and AI. So how can the US really start to address global standards for privacy, as well as some of the new emerging technologies?
Well, first of all, we need to start working with our allies and other like-minded countries around the world to try and find an agreement on global digital standards. There's work that's being done, for example, at the WTO, at the OECD. More recently, we have the newly created Trade and Technology Council between the US and the EU. But we need to make sure that these lead to concrete results. On privacy, I think the most important thing we can do in the US is to make sure we're leading globally. And that also means making sure that we have strong domestic policy, which means a national uniform consumer data privacy law. This is really a foundational issue because other things build on top of it. And other countries have been implementing and developing strong privacy standards. The EU has worked and had the GDPR in place for a while. We won't be able to shape standards abroad if we don't have our own standards. And we have a lot at stake in terms of making sure we uphold our values. We're a very innovative country. And so we need to make sure that we have strong domestic policy in this place as we go forward. And if you look at some of our digital trade agreements right now, for example, US-Japan or USMCA, provisions on privacy mostly require countries to enforce their own laws and to work on digital rules. But as we look forward to making sure we have strong protections on artificial intelligence or facial recognition, other things going forward, again, it starts with privacy. So, so this is an area where we need to take action here domestically, but again, need to also lead as part of that global effort.
Yeah, and I know, that you've been really a strong advocate of trying to get a domestic privacy legislation. So, we're all hoping that moves forward.
Continue to work with my colleagues to, I have legislation out there, the Information Transparency and Personal Data Control Act. We see states taking action. 3 states have laws. They're all different. We need to have strong federal policy. And again, that's going to be important for us to help lead as we work internationally on strong global standards.
Yeah. So you mentioned the different countries have different standards. And, you and I have really discussed a number of times the urgency of US leadership in promoting our standards, which are really ones of accountability and democracy, and how important that is to really counteract the standards that China is spreading, which are more of surveillance and censorship. So, what should really be our next steps to make sure that the US gets its standards adopted more broadly?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that digital governance impacts more than just trade. It's about upholding civil rights, civil liberties, human rights, making sure that we have strong protections for privacy, making sure that we have cybersecurity to protect consumers. And so all of that is important, and we need to be up to date on policy because these technologies continue to change, to evolve, and policy needs to keep up. So, we need to make sure that we are strong on privacy. For example, an area where we can move forward right away. China continues to take aggressive steps in setting its own standards, authoritarian standards, for example, on the internet. We need to reassert our leadership in this area. So engaging with like-minded nations, focusing on negotiating on shared digital standards in Europe and in Asia, and be leaders. I think it's important that we're rule makers, not rule takers, when it comes to issues of digital trade and governance, so that it's an issue of competitiveness, but it also is an issue of making sure that we are holding up consumer protections, human rights, civil liberties, as I said before. And those are all critical pieces of making sure we have a strong worker-centric digital trade agenda.
Yeah, I like that phrase that we should be the rule makers instead of the rule takers. I think I'm going to use that from now on. Well, thank you for taking the time. I think, these issues of how we create a digital trade agreement that works for workers and users of technology is really important. So I appreciate having the time to talk.
No, thanks. And just one last thing,
Please.
as we've had a lot of discussion on infrastructure as well, the infrastructure for a worker-centric agenda is also important, making sure that we have broadband across the country. We still have 1 in 4 Americans who don't have broadband internet service. If we're going to make sure everyone can participate and be part of this economy, and we've seen the impacts already during the pandemic, we've got to make sure we address those issues too. Broadband training opportunities, continue to build that capacity across the country and internationally.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's, in my mind, a critical part of what I started with, which is making the internet and making digital technologies both accessible and inclusive. So thanks for leading the way on that. Fingers crossed that the infrastructure legislation gets passed.
We have important work to do on building back better and implementing that agenda that the president laid out. So that's a top priority for all of us.
Well, thank you for your leadership.